Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome your host, Mr. Sidney Brownwood.
Hello and welcome to this edition of the TooFatLardies Oddcast. It's great to have you here in 2021, and here I'm also joined by the Ken and Deirdre of Historical Miniature Wargaming, Richard Clark and Nick Skinner. Gentlemen, welcome back to the Oddcast.
Hello, Sidney.
Oh,
A Coronation Street reference.
Oh.
Well, I thought that there's nothing wrong with a bit of Coronation Street, and it's the introducing Northern culture to our soft southern location in Lard Island.
Have you been cast in Coronation Street yet, Sid?
He's Norris. He's Norris.
My collection of fashionable cardigans has been on television as Norris. Yes, for all these years, I've hidden that secret very well. Thank you. At least it wasn't Abby or Shona. Anyway, we should move on because it's been a while since we've been talking about miniature wargaming. We've never talked about Coronation Street before. And I thought we'd all gather together and we'd chat about a number of different topics, which will include, during the course of this show, discussing serious wargaming. More of that later. But before we go on to that, guys, what have you been doing since New Year? I trust all the hangovers have gone.
Yeah, just about, I think. Yeah. I think this year so far has been one big hangover. But we keep battling through, don't we? I think the last time we spoke in the last Oddcast, we were talking about making ships and the ships I was going to make for KMH2, etc., etc. Well, so far, the ships that I've made have looked a lot like Stugs. In fact, that's probably because there have been Stugs. And the ships are still sitting there staring at me from the shelf, waiting for me to come on to making them. Because I've been distracted, sidetracked into growing Kampfgruppe Schmaltz or Lard, Kampfgruppe Lard, if you prefer it, with getting some new vehicles to bolster their ranks. So I've been making more tanks, some SDKFZs with the 20mm cannon on the back, and some lovely vehicles from First Corps that I've been working on that will be part of the column. It's going to be really, really good. I'm enjoying making them, and I've got a best bit on the bench recommendation for later on the back of it as well.
Is this for Arnhem?
It's potentially for Arnhem. Yeah, I'm looking more at Arnhem and also going into northern Germany.
And Rich, what have you been up to?
Landsknecks and more Landsknecks. I've been spending a lot of time doing Landsknecht encampments. I bought some really nice figures from Lead Adventure Miniatures, which I keep banging on about how they're not cheap, but they are lovely, and there's a real variety of sort of civilians in various stages of martialness, some women with rolling pins and meat cleavers and things like that, who are absolutely perfect for my little Landsknecht camps that I'm building up. So they're nearly done, and I'm just expanding with a few more Landsknecks, about 15 more Landsknecks, then I'm on to the Swiss. But I got kind of diverted and I've started on some Reiters. So I've got my plastic Perry late medieval 1500, which are absolutely perfect for serving alongside the Landsknecht. So I've also added some more light cavalry. So I'm really building up quite a varied force, but I'm looking forward to getting onto the Swiss. That should be fun. A slightly different theme, slightly different painting palette, which will be good fun to do. But it's just, I'm at that sort of dog end of the Landsknecks now, just filling in a few gaps. But so that's good. That's been really positive. I've been painting up a few more Stugs myself, funnily enough, but in 12mm for O Group. And I see Victrix have just released their Tiger 1 model, which I got an email yesterday saying we've just released it. So I hit purchase and purchased box of half a dozen of those, and also I got some more SDKFZ 251s, so I'm going to be able to do Panzer Grenadiers for my 12mm Germans for Normandy, so really excited about that. So that's all coming together. But of course, talking of O Group, we've had a lot of time getting O Group ready and to the printers, and we're now in that phase where we are taking advanced orders. So that's kept us busy. And I know, Sid, you said you had a few questions for me about O Group, so I'll do my best to trigger my inner Dave Brown and answer those. But also, I've just finished a new pint-sized campaign for 1940, which is called Capturing Caesar's Camp. And that is an attack by the 51st Highland Division at the Aberville bridgehead on the Somme River in June 1940. And that's a really good fun campaign. I've literally finished that 5 minutes before we came into the studio to record this. So it just needs proofreading through and just a couple more images, photographs got to be taken and dropped in. But that is completed, and that should be coming out. Well, it might even beat this Oddcast out. But yeah, so that's really exciting. That's been an interesting research project. I've been working with a guy in Tasmania, John Mumford, on that. So it's been good to do some work with him. And so, yeah, that's exciting stuff. So busy.
How many battles in that, Rich? How many encounters?
Well, mate, it's quite a short and sharp one, in as much as that there could be 7 games for the British, and the Germans could get a couple of opportunities to counter-attack if they're doing really well. So at the most, you would get 9 games, but more likely, at the least, you'd get 5 games. If the British can do it in 5, in a straight run, then the Germans don't get the opportunity to counterattack. But if the British can't, then the Germans will be able to put in 1, maybe 2 counterattacks. So there are 6 different tables. So even if you just played it as a scenario book, you'd have 6 different games. So yeah, no, it's really good. It focuses on the preliminary stages of the attack, because effectively the second phase of the attack was the 4th Seaforth Highlanders attacking with support from Charles de Gaulle, Colonel de Gaulle's French tanks. So it's really super sexy. You've got the Highlanders supported by French armour, which is great fun.
Nice.
The problem they had on the day was that the preliminary phase 1 attacks failed, and that meant when the Seaforths went in, the battle had already effectively been lost. So we focused down and looked at what the key points of the battle were. And the key point of the battle is not the main attack, but the the first phase supporting attacks that were meant to clear the flanks for the main attack going in. Had those flanks been cleared, the Seaforths and de Gaulle should have been able to drive straight up onto the heights, take out the German 88mm guns up there in a place called Caesar's Camp, which was an old a Roman fort that was up there. But because the preliminary attacks failed, they failed. That attack failed. So we're really focused down, and this mainly focuses on the efforts of the Cameron Highlanders, who are playing a supporting role but critical role. So can they get up the ridge onto the main ridge overlooking Aberville? Because if they can, then the German position on the Somme becomes untenable, and it could well be, we're seeing this forming part of the Wagon line. If the Allies can win here, it's potentially the new defensive line on the Somme that's going to save France. So it's a really important action, very much like the Jean Blou Gap was really key. This is a really key part of what's happening. So yeah, it's good. Really excited about it.
Yeah.
Worked till midnight on it last night and started again at 6 o'clock this morning. So I'm a bit frayed at the edges, but caffeine is my friend.
Yeah, indeed. Well, it's going to be a good one to look forward to. Yeah, excellent. Well,
that sounds really, really good. When you mentioned about Caesar's Camp, I had thought it was an infamy scenario to start.
yeah. Well, that's what many people have made the assumption. But there we are.
And we've had virtual Lard, of course.
Oh, not ours.
Since we last came together. I mean, that was really good fun. I actually played 2 games. One in the morning with the Filibusters from the Lard 2020 magazine, that Colin Murray put together. Had a really fun game of that in the morning, playing the Mexicans and firing my my massive cannon down the main street to keep it clear of Americans. We had really good fun playing that. Hello to John, who played his first ever game of sharp practice there, and I hope he enjoyed it. Well, I know he enjoyed it. And to Matt and Welsh Jeff with a J, who read the script perfectly, and we had really good fun with that. All looked after really nicely by Colin. And in the afternoon, I took to the seas, got a bit of inspiration back by playing some good old Kiss Me Hardy in a game that was run by Andy Crow, and I really enjoyed it. And of course, Sid, as you'll know, true to form, whenever I play KMH, I did the right thing and lost. It was really good fun.
Kind of thing when you design the rules yourself and put a load of scenarios together, you're going to end up on fire.
Yeah, absolutely. It was good fun to reconnect though.
Well, that's good. That's really good. I mean, it did look to be a good event. I didn't take part, so I've done some of the others, and I thought it was time for other people to have a go. But I thought it looked like a really fantastic event. So, real hats off to Jeremy and everyone interviewing, preparing the stuff on that one.
Absolutely, well done, Jeremy. Really good.
Yeah, fabulous. Yeah, very much so. I put on a game this time. First time I've ever put on a game, because I've just been in awe of other people doing it and thought I could never do that. But as we've discussed, you know, I've cut my teeth on running online games over the past few months, and I was able to run a couple of games of Infamy, which were great fun. Really good. Same scenario, totally different results, but that was good fun. And of course, there's the pub in the evening, which was the rock upon which I was shipwrecked.
It's funny you mentioned Infamy as well, because I mean, I know we talked about it a little bit over the course of the last few weeks for various things, but I did read quite an interesting review of Infamy in Slingshot, which came out at the back end of last year, Slingshot being the journal of the Society of Ancients. And I thought that was quite a good review. It was fairly balanced. There was a few things which were put in there, which I thought were quite interesting. It is obviously an august journal which has been going for many years, and the bedrock of ancient wargaming in a number of different ways. And I think I sent it over to you, Richard, to have a quick look at. There was a couple of things in there I thought you might be intrigued by.
Yeah, I was pleased with it. It was interesting, actually. A number of people contacted me and said, "Are you being sarcastic about being pleased about this?" I can't. Do you have the wording there, Sid? I can't remember exactly what was said.
It took me right back, Rich, while you try and find it.
Yeah.
It was the kind of review that we had when we first released I Ain't Been Shot, Mum. It was very much in the same style. And I got a huge feeling of warmth, which isn't just my old age and incontinence. I got a huge feeling of warmth from reading that, actually, which you know, and I know you did too, because we spoke about it and laughed about it. It was... have you found it yet?
Yeah, I have. This is the quote I really liked. Quote, "The level of randomness may not suit serious wargamers, let alone those who have not drunk a couple of cans of lager before the game." I was over the moon with that. And several people contacted me and said, "Why were you pleased with that?" Well, the answer is, there's two things you can be famous for as a game designer. You can either be famous for writing bland rules that are exactly like the last set of rules that you produce that will offend and surprise nobody, or you can have a reputation for trying to push the envelope. And when you push the envelope, look for new mechanisms, try and find new ideas, try and find ideas that are challenging for the gamers. You can sometimes upset people by doing that. And next year for Nick and I is a very important year, because it will mark 20 years since we published I Ain't Been Shot, Mum, and we intend to have some pretty serious celebrations throughout the year, possibly not all 365 days, but something fairly close. And you think, well, good, because after 25 years, people aren't saying that I am the wargaming equivalent of Val Doonican or whatever, just churning out the same old easy listening music, and that what we're doing is still challenging and still exciting. So yeah, it was a bit of a backhanded compliment, to be honest with you, but it was one that really made me pleased, because it made me think, good, I still have the power to upset the livestock.
Yeah.
And that's a positive thing. That's better than people saying you're a boring old tosser.
Yeah, and did it throw you right back, Rich, to those days when we were at IBSM, the kind of friction and tea break, and sometimes you don't even get a whole. Sometimes not all units will activate. What's that all about?
Well,
really interesting to read that.
Do you remember the classic review, which and I'm paraphrasing slightly, but barely paraphrasing at all. Anybody who enjoys TooFatLardies rules must be into free love and mind-bending drugs, which for years I had printed out in a frame on the wall behind my desk, because I was so pleased with it, because the same thing, it tells you you're challenging people when they react like that.
And I was really pleased, because I think, I've been feeling lately that we've been much more mainstream than we used to be. And that's actually a kind of a statement of not being mainstream. So I quite like that. It makes me feel, I think, like I said on Twitter, it makes me feel like I can still throw the TV through the window, and it's still okay to do that.
Well, that's right. So once I read it, I went outside and drove my Rolls Royce into the swimming pool.
Good job you got 2 swimming pools, Richard. Okay, well,
the other one's got the Bentley in it.
There's probably enough banter to get us started, but after that, I think we can possibly go to the workshop and talk a little bit more about what we've been building, painting, and dropping on the carpet and making a mess with.
From the makers of Chain of Command comes a tale of drama.
Mon capitaine, les Anglais are on the bridge. Ah, so it seems we shall meet again, Captain Fondleo.
A tale of action.
That's it, lads. Give them another volley, they're falling back. Remember, 3 rounds a minute.
A tale of romance.
But Mr. Fondleo, you are so prominent.
For large skirmishes in the era of black powder, where the story ends, sharp practice begins.
And we're back. And we're wading through virtual boxes of stuff and trays of figures and benches full of paints to look at what we've been building, painting, and messing around with over the last month. So I'm going to go first. I've been doing a painting challenge, the Analog Hobbies Painting Challenge, number 11, which has been great fun. I've done it every year for the last 8 years, and it's 3 months of painting various different things, which have been on our workbench for a long time. And I've been doing a bit of a variety this year, because the challenge is based around a map, and the map is of a dungeon. So you have to go through different rooms in the dungeon, and that requires you to paint different things. So in addition to various vignettes and 17th century stuff, I've actually been painting some really old Hammer stuff from the 1980s, which is orcs, demons, dwarves, a dragon, and actually liberated from the strictures of painting uniforms and muskets and Falari hats and God knows what. That's been quite fun. And it has reminded me of how much fun painting can be if you just sort of forget about just doing 50 17th century musketeers or 25 different cuirassiers for a project, and you can just sort of paint exactly what you want. So rediscovering that love of just using different color paints has been great. So all my demons and dragons and stuff like that are painted pink. So I thought, well, I hardly ever paint pink, and pink is a really fun color to paint. You can make it a soft pink or a vivid neon pink, and that's been just liberating in all sorts of ways, no pun intended. So that's been a lot of fun. I've really enjoyed that. And amongst that, I've painted some German mercenaries for 1688. Good fun with a unit of mercenaries, which is lingering around a camp. Again, no pun intended. And also, my units of French gendarmerie are coming across. These are the sort of, well, they're not really household troops, but they're better than most line cavalry. I mean, they are the aristocratic French inheritors of the gendarmes' legacy, but they're much more streamlined in the 1680s in Louis XIV's time. And they've been good to do. So I've made those up with lots of green stuff and lots of brown stuff, so putty and ribbons and lace and all that sort of malarkey going to disguise the underlying castings. And they've been really a real pleasure to do. So again, just indulging myself over the winter months in doing projects that I find fun. So wargaming should always be fun. I sometimes think we beat ourselves up a little bit by saying, oh, we really need to paint all of our ACW figures, or we need to have various different companies just done. But sometimes we've all got so much stuff to do that you're never going to get to the end of it. So you might as well just have fun and paint whatever you want.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, actually, and that mirrors completely what I've been doing. And whilst I'm not proposing a best bit on the bench here, I must draw attention to the fun I've had doing my Landsknecht camps. And so much of this, look, basically, I've got a couple of them, and it's just, I got these tents off eBay, and I think they're just 3D printed. A lot of the paraphernalia that's hanging around, some of it I got from Annie at Bad Squiddo. Her scenic stuff is really, really lovely. So this fire was from her. But all these other barrels, they're all just 3D printed off sort of random people on the internet. And talking of pink, I don't know if you can see, I've got a little ratty rat there with a bright pink tail. So I know what you mean by vivid pinks. And there's something quite, when you start to mix up a pink, you realise just how many pinks comprise pinkness. So, but just the fact that you can get so many lovely things, and this arrived yesterday, you won't see it, it's just a great big cauldron to go by the fire, just a bit of old tat off eBay. And I just think it's some of those additional bits that you can get that aren't in the normal ranges of, you know, the well-known companies that we all know who produce bits of terrain. But these are just done by private individuals, and the whole world of 3D printing, especially now you can print in resin, allows all these doors to be opened up for all this kind of additional bric-a-brac you can get. And this is another thing I got, which I really like. It was from First Corps. It's a flock of sheep, and it's cast as one great big flock of sheep. And you get a little shepherd with it, and I added a dog and changed the head and did whatever on the shepherd, just to make it a bit more Renaissance-y. But just this is the type of thing you think, I really fancy doing that. I don't really fancy painting some units this week. I want to do something just a bit fun. And that's exactly the way I've been feeling as well, Sid. So it's been good to have an opportunity to do weird and wonderful stuff and just order strange bits on eBay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally with you there, Rich, totally with you. And we've all bought that sort of stuff from years around. So when I was doing those German mercenaries, I set the scene in a sort of a camp, and I put camp followers on there, put a dog and a cat, and the cat's chasing the dog. We've got a drunk, we've got bottles, you know, which have been dropped on the floor, we've got broken glass, and all that sort of stuff. Kind of when you sort of think of serious wargaming, you shouldn't really sort of be bothered about. You should just be getting those units down. And to be quite honest, I could probably have done 2 or 3 units in the time that it took me to do one. But you don't always have all of the shelf space that we want on the, or indeed the table space to deploy all the units we want. See, there's a certain pleasure in making the unit that you are doing look as different, unusual, and fun as possible. And there's lots of rules to be taken from, you know, the Games Workshop book and other people's books like that, saying, you know, you can really make those units individual and make them fly. And yeah, you could have 6 regiments of line infantry, or you could really go to town and, you know, make sure that your landscape in your table, which you are using, really lives. Horses for courses, of course, not at all a criticism of people who paint, as we all have done, hundreds and hundreds of figures for dozens of battalions, but there's a balance, and it's January and February, so we deserve a break.
Yeah. You're hitting a nerve for me there, Sid, because, you know, you said about serious and fun. Well, it should be fun, shouldn't it? And you know, and I know that there's ships that I should be working on as the serious part of developing what I want to do with, you know, various rule sets or get games back on the table. But there's a fun part of it as well, and the fun part is that I want to paint some more Stugs. So I've got some Stugs from our longtime friend Paul Edwards, that Sabotage. He did me some really lovely Stugs that in 1/48, which are beautiful, and I can't wait to finish them off. And I also got some First Corps vehicles, as I said, to boost my camp group. I wanted them to have some kind of ad hoc transport, because, you know, we know the German army is very good at pulling into commission just about every vehicle it can by sort of late 1944. And First Corps they do a civilian truck, which is just an open backed truck, which is, could be found anywhere across the roads of Europe in the 1940s, and I'm intending to do that as a truck that they have added to their camp groups, just to stick stuff in and to tow a pack or whatever, if it could. And then they do civilian vehicles as well, so they've got some quite fun saloon cars. They've got a refugee vehicle with mattresses on, etc., and I've got one of those. And they do a saloon car, I think, in there. It's like an a very British Civil War type range with some civilians in. Well, I don't need the civilians, but I did want the car, and I thought that'd be quite a fun staff car. But in all of these, and this is where my nomination for best bit of the bench is going to come in, actually, guys, because last year. I really miss going to war game shows. I really miss going to shows, and one of the reasons is that it used to be where I got all the bits and pieces stuff, like some grass tufts and the things that Rich, you said you've been buying on eBay, little pots and little barrels, etc., all that kind of loose scatter. I used to pick up at shows. It was what I used to, didn't go with a big budget, and we were normally on the stand for long periods of time, so you don't get a chance to go around and do much, but you do get a chance to go around and get little bits from all the small businesses. And I had some fantastic stuff, which I used on the front of some of my German tanks, which is like the foliage. They covered their tank with foliage because of the air threat. German tanks in late war are often just like big, impressive, big bushes driving down the road. And I found some stuff last year that I used, and I've used it all up, and I couldn't remember where it came from. But I put a shout out on Twitter, and again, so this is where Twitter is really helpful in the hobby. I put a couple of photos out of that tank, and I said, look, this camouflage bush that I got last year, I picked it up at a show. I can't remember where I got it from, or I've since lost the packaging, but it's absolutely brilliant. Can anybody point me to it? And of course, within an hour, I had about 5 or 6 people saying to me, this is Mini Nature. Which I recognise as a brand that does really good terrain items and foliage, etc. So I don't know why I didn't look there, but the prompt was fantastic. They're Mini Nature, it's oak foliage, and what's great about it is if you're doing late war tanks for World War II, it comes as almost like a mat. It's like imagine a chest wig. Sid, it comes on that these days. It comes on that nice backing paper, and you just peel it off and stick it on. Well, it's a bit like that for this foliage. It's just like chest wigs for your tanks, and I think if they market it as that, they probably make a fortune. But I would recommend it most definitely as the best bit on the bench. Not only do they do oak foliage, but actually you can get many other types of foliage available as well. Alternate styles of chest wig are available, Rich.
Do you think that they could actually create them to fit on the specific vehicle? So you could get like a Mark IV Merkin.
Yes, I suppose so. So anyway, I'm looking forward to covering my Stugs and my vehicles of Camp Group Schmaltz with this impressive bush. My recommendation for best bit on the bench, Mini Nature foliage.
Well, I've got a best bit on the bench, which might have, certainly we've talked about before, but it was one of your Christmas presents to me, which is Army Painter Quick Shade washers. It's not the stuff you dip your figures into with a tin, it's the washers. So I got these from one of you at Christmas, and they've been absolutely fantastic. I've really, really loved using these. So we've all used inks before. Shout out to Per Broden, who I know is a big fan of Winsor & Newton Chestnut Brown ink. We've all used Vallejo inks. We've probably used inks from all over the place. But if you've not tried out the Army Painter Quick Shade washes, I'd definitely give them a go. They're a bit thicker than the Citadel Games Workshop washes, and they're thicker than the Vallejo washes. I have seen people online, there are lots of videos on YouTube with people using them over a white or light grey finish, and they will stain very nicely, and jobs are good, and as they say, you don't really need anything more than just the wash. But if you use them over an undercoat, and the undercoat is light and variegated, so light yellow or bright red or light brown, you use one of the washes, and there's about 10 washes in a pack you can get for £25. The result, I think, is really stunning because the washes pool beautifully and they adhere to the paint on the undercoat. You don't really need to be faffing around with shading, and all you need really afterwards, if you want a contrast finish, is you just have the highlight. So they are really good. Richard?
Yeah, the good thing about them is as well is that they match the dips that they use, but of course these ones are water based, so they dry really quickly. So where I've dipped a unit that I've been painting, excuse me, where I've dipped a unit that I've been painting, and all of a sudden I go, oh, I'm one figure short, and I've got to get it ready for the game. You can use some of that wash. And then you get pretty much the same effect. So they are really nice. I mean, I tend to use they do a strong tone, a light tone, and a dark tone. They tend to be the ones I use the most, but they also do a full range of colours, which I've got as well. And as you say, it's just applying that wash over a base colour. And it gives it tremendous depth, doesn't it? Really nice, lovely gradation of tone.
Yeah, you get a real depth. It's a different look to the sort of the Kevin Dallimore Wargames Foundry 3 colours approach with the triads. Yeah. It's more dramatic, it's more liquidy, and the figures do look like they've been washed. They don't look like they've been painted meticulously by hand. But it is a nice look when you do a lot of figures like that. It works best where the figures have some folds in the clothing, so that it's really nice on Dixon's and Cobblestone figures. It's a beautiful look. It's perhaps less effective on the front rank figures, which are beautifully sculpted but without a lot of gradations in the clothing. But experimenting and testing is the name of the game. And on some of the older sort of sculpts that I've been painting, which are the sort of the old Hammer 1980s, 1990s sculpts, it looks really good. So anything fantasy or sci-fi, I imagine they'd be really good.
Really good for World War II as well, where you're not talking about bright colours that you get in the Napoleonic period. So you get much more subtlety. So I use different washes depending on what part of the figure it is. So if I'm doing field grey, or if I'm doing something dark, I'll use the dark wash. But if I'm doing the bread bag, I might use the soft tone. And if I'm doing the rifle stock, which I paint and then kind of put a bit of highlighting on to represent grain, you can just lightly wash over that, and of course it's water soluble, so you can get the level of opaqueness that you want. I put that over and it ties those colours together, so you get more of a soft look than you would do when you're contrasting with a base coat, a highlight, and then a final highlight. It actually ties all those together in one look. But I don't use it across the whole figure, but I selectively pick out the bits where I use the different washes. Works really well.
That's a really good point, Rich. I mean, we do see, I have seen on lots of videos online, and I've tried it, you've tried it. I tried it on those Saxons a few years ago, that you just have a figure and you coat it all with the same one tone or dark tone. Get a great result, no problems at all about that. But the result, I think, is increasingly better where you're washing different washes on different colours. I mean, it sounds obvious, but those you get a different effect, and it just looks a little bit less uniform. But the other thing is that, again, taking it from Games Workshop, Citadel, and people like Duncan Rose who've been online for a while now, washing over highlights tones down the highlights. Yeah. Sometimes that's a really nice effect as well. So you can really go over the top with a highlight. Yeah. But once you turn it down, it looks more cloth-like, basically, for want of a better word. Yeah. And there's different things you can try. I think that's the message here from me.
Can I make one other comment as well? It's not a best thing on the bench, but just what's been reinforced to me over the last few weeks making these kits is that whenever you get kits that are part resin, part metal, sometimes putting them together can be tricky, especially if you've got small parts or different lugs that need to fit together. A resin plug going into a metal cast hole. You know what? There's a reason why some of the best kits are made from plastic, right? So just worth saying that if you're going to make resin kits with metal parts, green stuff is your friend. I use it as almost like a bit of plasticine glue that holds those together. Me, I'm a big fan of super glue, but even super glue sometimes isn't man enough for the task of getting resin and metal to come together effectively. And that's, my absolute bugbear in the hobby of late, in the last couple of years, has been 20mm cannon, German 20mm cannon, and the kits that are available that create 20mm cannon. Please, can we have some better kits? I love the First Call kit. I'm really happy with the way that I've managed to get it to look, but by God, it nearly went out the window a couple of times. And I've made other 20mm cannons from other manufacturers, and I'd say the same thing about all of those as well. Please, can we have some better kits?
What you want, mate, is some 3D prints.
You're not wrong there, my friend. I think I think these really are the future. They're getting better and better. I mean, the quality of the Stugs that Paul Edwards has given me, and he did some bicycles for me. So I wanted to do some bicycles. I wanted to do some Germans running along with some bicycles, and others as well. But they're fantastic. The quality that he's now getting, and I think he's really top of the range for. I'm sure there are other excellent people out there, but Paul's stuff is always top notch.
Well, I mean, that's a great discussion about things like bicycles, but I do feel when we're moving on to bicycles, we are getting out of the realm of serious wargaming. As Chris Pringle once said to me, had no idea where the cycling corps were cycling to, but that wasn't something he wanted to replicate on the tabletop. But before we leave, we need to anoint our best bit on the bench. So do we have a best bit on the bench? Richard, I think your flock of sheep probably wins best bit of the bench for serious wargamers the world over. But
mini nature oak foliage every time. Better than a flock of sheep.
Nick's Magic Merkin. I would like to suggest that O Group is probably better than all of that old bollocks, but I would say that, wouldn't I? So, but in terms of best bit on the bench, O Group has been my personal task, and I didn't do it in the workshop, so it can't count. But I reckon your washes are the most practical ones, Sidney. As a man who doesn't have a dog in this fight, I'm gonna cast the vote and give it to Sidney.
Well, thank you very much for that. That's very kind. Well, we'll move on from chest wigs and flocks of sheep and army painter washes, our winner. Just remind everyone, because talking about bicycles, we need to talk about serious wargaming, and that is going to be our big issue for the rest of the day. And yes, we haven't forgotten about O Group. We are returning to that at the end of the show when we enter the library. But before that, we have our big issue.
Sidney Roundward. He's got red trousers.
And we're back. We're back in the hallowed halls of the library, but we're not going to the bookshelves just yet because we're sitting on the couch of contemplation. And we are discussing our big issue for this Oddcast, which is serious wargaming. And are we serious wargamers? Indeed, what is serious wargaming? And this was something which I think was triggered by the review in Slingshot, undoubtedly, a serious magazine, which I personally love and have loved for many years, but triggered by that discussion about whether a set of rules that Rich and Nick have published have been serious wargaming. So what do we think serious wargaming is? Is it an academic thing? Is it stuff which has true real world applications? Is it something we can learn in college? Or is it just the way that we play our war games on the table and the rules that we use to play them? So, Rich, you were the person who I thought was the best placed to answer the question first.
Well, I'm not really sure what serious wargaming is, to be honest with you. Is a serious wargamer somebody who is serious about the games they play? Is a serious wargamer somebody who likes rules that are serious and contain no element of fun? I mean, what is it? I don't know. I mean, I think very much one of the things that's positive about the hobby is that it's not a one-size-fits-all hobby. If you and I went to play squash, a local squash club, and we joined a squash league, we couldn't say at the start of a match, oh, let's just change the rules because I think it would be better if I got 2 points for this, not 1 or whatever. You have to do squash like the rules say. With wargaming, it's all things to all people and nothing to anyone at the same time, isn't it? One man's meat is another man's poison. I could play a game which I felt was serious. I could design a game which I felt was serious, but in which there were elements of humour. So, but I think that the thing about that review that was interesting, first of all, I think the guy reviewing it wasn't saying these are not a serious set of rules. I think he was probably flagging up, as any good reviewer should, to people who considered themselves to be serious wargamers with leather patches on their elbows and a briar pipe on the go while they pore over maps, that this is not a set of rules that has a fixed 6-inch move, I go, you go. And I think that many people, I think what he's doing is really flagging it up and saying, don't expect this to be the same as DBA, DBM, whatever it is that you play. There are some ideas in here that are going to be different. So first of all, I just want to make clear that I didn't feel that what he said was a criticism of the rules, but more an important job for a reviewer to flag up to people what they can expect from the rules. But I did think it was interesting that the area where he felt would cause the most consternation amongst our leather elbow patched serious wargamers was the fact that variable movement, unpredictable movement, well, not unpredictable movement, but variable movement, because movement is predictable. When you roll 2d6, you can predict you're not very likely to go 2 inches and you're not very likely to go 12 inches, whereas you are very likely to go 6, 7, 8 inches. So there is a degree of predictability in there, but there's not certainty in there. But I thought it was interesting, as I say, that that was the area which was going to cause the most surprise, that you weren't certain of exactly how far your troops were going to move. And I think this has been a long recurring theme that we've seen. It's interesting that when wargamers fire, they're quite happy to have a degree of variability based on the roll of dice. So they don't simply take the figures from Bisley or any other, rifle range that people operate on and say, well, troops get an average of 68% hits and therefore it should be something in that region. They're quite happy with that. They're also quite happy with close combat being more indefinable. But when it comes to movement, people seem to want to have the certainty and security of knowing how far their troops are going to move. And what's interesting is we played a Kriegspiel this week, which maybe we'll talk about, a tactical Kriegspiel. And in the Kriegspiel rules, you don't have variable movement rates. If you do, it's a choice of the umpire. So the Kriegspiel 1824 rules will tell us that troops move 200 paces, pretty much. When they get into action at close range, they're likely to up that to 250 paces or whatever. But what you do get in a Kriegspiel situation is you get delays where people stand still because they're waiting to interpret the message that has just come through from their commander. You get delays where people are having to send a message. Once they've got the message from their commander, they then have to pass that message on to the 3 battalions that they're commanding. And they could go charging off with the 1st battalion that they are next to, but then they wouldn't have any support from the 2nd and 3rd battalion in their regiment. So by definition, the commander of a regiment will say, right, I'm going to form up here, 2nd battalion form up on my right, 3rd battalion form up on their right or to the rear. And because that takes time, you get delays in the action in a Kriegspiel where the whole brigade is inert or apparently inert while it changes its tactical shape for a period of time. So that introduces the friction by actually replicating its very cause. Whereas in a war game, we tend to see, in a tabletop figure war game, we tend to say, well, look, we know that there is friction on the battlefield, so we can apply it in a slightly more abstract fashion. You've also got an issue in a skirmish game where the fact that, the ground is so variable that you cannot possibly predict with absolute certainty how far your troops are going to move. But you can say, I reckon over a period of 5 or 6 turns, they should be there. And that's because when you have that bell curve, when you roll 2d6, that says that there is a degree of predictability. And the more often you do it, the more likely you are to get an average result.
Yeah. Sometimes it's a question of scale as well, isn't it? I mean, it's entirely understandable in a skirmish game that you've got unpredictability as regards moving across a hedge line or something like that, or a ploughed field. You just can't moderate whether it's going to be boggy in the middle or not. But I think a lot of war gamers really want to be kind of bird's eye view Wellingtons at some point in the game or in some point of their wargaming activity.
I don't think they do. I don't think they do anymore. I think that's a 20-year-old viewpoint of the hobby. I think and there is a rump of gamers who still hold true to that helicopter vision general, and possibly
you don't think that that's a key component in people wanting predictable movement, because they would see that on an operational or grand tactical level, but when they're dealing with a small tactical level, it frustrates some people.
I think that's really interesting. I think what we saw in the we're going to talk about the game that Richard and I ran this week, but this desire for people to be have an oversight of the entire battle is really interesting, and something I think we can challenge. I know Richard did, but I want to go to in terms of our quest for what is a serious war game, I wanted to look at our friends from the ministry and see what they say. The man from the ministry, we can consult. Okay, so serious wargaming. I thought, well, okay, how do the Ministry of Defence talk about it? The MOD have a wargaming handbook. Okay, I don't know if you've seen it. It's available online. It's about how the military use and see war games. It says, okay, in this handbook, that a war game is. Let's see how many of these we can tick off when we go through the games that we play. A war game is a simulation of selected aspects of a conflict situation in accordance with predetermined rules, data, and procedures to provide decision-making experience and decision-making information that is applicable to real-world situations. Now, 4 parts of that then. Simulation of a selected aspects of a conflict situation. Well, yes, I mean, our games do that. Not our games, but all war games do that to some degree. Some of them go into more granularity aspects of it and treat it in a different way than others. Predetermined rules, data, and procedures. Absolutely. Big tick in the box for that. I think you argue that just about any game you play does that. That's the whole way that games work, isn't it? Based around rules and procedures. To provide decision-making experience and information. That, I guess, depends on your motives. It's really, I find that very interesting part of war games, but I don't think everybody has to. And something that is applicable to real world situations. Well, I don't think it really affects the way that I do my grocery shopping or the way that I treat my kids. And so for me per se, that might not be something that's an outcome always, but I think we can learn a huge amount from it and allow us then to understand what unfolded on the battlefields of the time. And for me, a big challenge in all our games is, what was going on for these guys on the ground and how did they make these decisions and in what context? And we use things like doctrine. We use things like organizations, historically accurate organizations, equipment, loadouts and scenarios, etc., to create games that we think are plausible. I wouldn't, however, say that any of that necessarily means they're serious or that they have to be serious. They can be, but actually, I don't think you play a game of Water Tanker and say that was a serious war game. Although we do know that actually, informally, people in the British Army are using Water Tanker, and then using it afterwards to stimulate discussion about tank tactics. So I don't know. I really don't know the answer to the question, but it's interesting, mate.
Let me pick up on that. So just follow. I made a note of those as you wrote them. So a simulation of selected aspects of a conflict situation. Well, that means what we're doing is we're taking a war and we're creating something that simulates some of those aspects. Now, one often gets online this thing where people say, you're just playing a game. It's just a game. Yeah, we are playing a game, but it has to have some basis in reality. Otherwise, it would not be plausible. So, for example, if you were creating a game based on racing cars, if you had a racing car and I had a clapped out Volkswagen camper van, and yet in the car racing game, my Volkswagen camper van went 400 miles an hour and your Ferrari went 20 miles an hour, people would automatically go, well, that's clearly ridiculous. So as part of designing that game, you have to reflect the capabilities of that of whatever you're representing, be that a car or a military unit.
So does serious equal researched?
No. No, it doesn't. Research represents well-informed. What you then do with that game is entirely up to you. It doesn't have to be serious. But, so continuing, so predetermined rules, data and procedures, well, that's basically the design of a rule. and that provides a decision-making experience that's applicable to real-world situations. Well, obviously, the real-world situation they're talking about there is not you doing your shopping. It's about, are those decisions pertinent to the decisions that will be made by the commanders at the time? And I always think, and I know you always think, because this is a mantra that we talk about all the time when we're designing games, is if you're designing a game, what you need to be looking at for that commander is 2 levels down. So if you're a platoon leader, you've got to be looking at the actions of your sections and your teams. If you're a corps commander, you've got to be looking at the actions of your divisions and your brigades. And you're not getting involved at regimental level or battalion level, or you're certainly not getting involved in what the different sections are doing. So that is done in order to make it pertinent in terms of providing decision-making experience that is applicable to a real-world situation. And that real-world situation is an historical situation, not a contemporary one.
Yeah.
I think the difficulty is getting bound up with the word serious, isn't it, really? It doesn't really mean anything. I mean, it's kind of an adjective which is just chucked in there. I mean, what we're really looking for in a game that we enjoy, I think, is something which is context. From which comes the plausibility. It's setting the game in a context. And if the context is that the friction as regards the movement across a ploughed field is relevant, then that context is important. If you're dealing at an operational level relating to the context of moving armies across whole countries, then that context isn't relevant. But a different context might be, a different movement penalty might be. And it's establishing what the context of the game is, as you say, Rich, looking at the position that you're taking as a rules writer and writing for a particular place, which is really important. I think the games which might ostensibly be said to be less serious are those which lack a context. They're a game which is very much a game, which is the figures which were available, and the context, the historical context, doesn't play as big a part. I think when games are identified as being serious, the context is probably very evident from the game which is being played, whether or not that context is precisely replicated on the battlefield. So logistics is a good example. You might say, well, a game which has clear logistics evidence in battlefield ammunition is serious. That might be the view of a number of people, possibly of me. But I don't really feel that serious really helps with that, because you can reflect that context in a lot of different ways in the rules. You just have to be aware as a rules writer and a game developer, scenario creator, or just game put oner, that those contexts exist. And I think framing a game in a context of history goes a long way to actually providing historical environment in which the game's being played and people act historically accordingly. And that's one thing that in a Kriegspiel you're able to control as the umpire.
Let me turn this around and ask you a question and say, so Sidney, if I were designing a game from a blank sheet of paper, and I decided as the first stepping stone in that design procedure that I would allow you as a commander the ability to know exactly where your troops would be after X amount of time, would you say that that was a serious attempt to replicate the information that a commander in reality would have?
Objection, Your Honour. I think he's attempting to lead the witness.
Of course.
What would Nick, as my lawyer, say? My attorney in this?
I've claimed the fifth, Sidney. I mean, the answer is obviously, well, no, it doesn't. It's not plausible, is it? And plausible equals serious to some degree. In some of this, plausible equals serious.
And this is my point: that if you phrase that implied question in the other way round, does it lead you to the conclusion that having a fixed 6 inches of movement is more serious than a set of rules that has non-predictable movement? And I would say no, non-predictable movement is actually a much more serious attempt to reflect the imperfect knowledge that a commander has on the battlefield. But did I design it like that because I wanted it to be infamy to be serious? No, I designed it like that because I wanted infamy to be plausible. So plausible and serious don't equal the same thing. You can't have a set of rules with a card in it called Onanist and claim that you're being entirely serious. But, you know, that's just, you know, that's something that's part of making the game a fun and enjoyable experience that raises a small laugh. But the outcome of that action is not implausible. Nick.
Yeah, I think that's so. We've got two things here, haven't we? Well, we've got at least two things. You've got serious, and serious as a word has different meanings to different people. You know, you can connect serious to plausible. You can connect serious to, in the military, serious equals real. You know, is it really enough to be serious, to be worthwhile as an exercise, to have training validity? And is it serious in some cases will equal ethical, okay, which is an avenue we probably don't want to explore in this podcast, but I know there are discussions around that in the hobby. And then one thing that serious doesn't equal normally is fun. Serious and fun are two, you know, whatever you call a word with an opposite meaning, they don't tend to go together. So, you know, can we have serious and fun? Well, we like to think we can. We like to think that the games that we design and you know, create plausible outcomes, but put that in a framework where you can play it in an evening with your mate and it can be fun to do so. I wouldn't do it if it wasn't fun. Christ, I'm not here to, you know, life's difficult enough as it is without trying to make it more difficult. We want to have fun with our games.
Interesting that you touch on that thing about the professional wargamers in the military looking to ensure that the game, the war game they're about to embark on is sensible enough and have enough pertinence to what their next mission is going to be to make it worthwhile to do. And I think that is actually the big downfall of the military, is that what they're doing is they're using a Kriegspiel to practice what they're going to do next. Now, that is very, very specific. It doesn't give a breadth of experience. And I would suggest, and funnily enough, I was having a conversation with somebody in a military organization this week outside the United Kingdom, and having this discussion and saying, well, look, if you were to set a Kriegspiel in an entirely different period, World War II, 19th century, whatever, it would provide a much more holistic experience in terms of allowing people to fail, which if you're training for the next mission, you don't want to be seen to fail. You don't want to be seen to potentially take risks. So you're potentially going to take the most conservative small c path towards the goal that you want to achieve, because you don't want to get something wrong. Now, if you take people outside the environment of the next mission that we're preparing for and just say, right, we're going to play this game and it's going to be fun and you're going to have an opportunity to learn something about command in an age when there's no radio communication, so imperfect communications, imperfect information, stale information, that can be a much greater informative experience than just training for the next exercise. Sidney, you're waving your arms about like a huge gibbon.
I thought it was more orangutan. Prepared to go for gibbon. Learning, informative. Those are two words which are coming up. You took the example of the infamy card. I mean, that's fun. That's entertaining. It's funny. There's an element of friction in all of those cards, aren't there? To be honest.
In onanism.
In the cards, Richard. In the cards. In the card.
Right, yeah.
Learning, informative. I mean, those are things that you've always said that, you know, offline and online, if you like, that, you know, we like games from which we learn something about why history happened, and dragging it all back to sort of wargaming on the tabletop. Those are things which can be fun. I mean, Nick, you said, well, serious and fun don't always go together, but I'm a historical wargamer for a reason. I'm a historical miniature wargamer for a reason. It's not just an accident that it's historical wargames I like. I like to know things about history because it informs and I learn about things. So those don't necessarily, I don't regard myself as being a serious wargamer because I don't really like that term. But I do like to find out things. I like to learn. I was chatting last night with a really good friend of ours, Mark Backhouse, about his new set of rules, Strength and Honour, and how that informs reading about history in the books, and he was on a podcast with Henry Hyde about that, saying very much the same thing.
Yeah.
Because you're learning about those battles from the books, and then you're recreating on the tabletop. There's a mutual sort of information passing there. That could be fun.
It can be, but the way that we write rules intentionally is the fact that we say, look, this can be a historical learning experience, but it doesn't have to be. That might not be what you want from a game. So the game has got to be fun so that people will pick it up and play it because it's fun and they enjoy it. And if by playing a fun game, they are informed about what happened historically, then the learning part is a pill they accidentally swallow. It's a bit like my dog, Freddie. He takes a tablet every morning because he's insane. And I tend to put it in a sausage every morning. And he doesn't know he's taking the nasty pill. He thinks he's just getting the good bit of sausage. And that's the way it needs to be with a historical war game. You've got to enjoy the sausage. And if you take a history pill along the way, that means you've learned something. Brilliant, but it doesn't have to be there.
Do you have you thought about taking those tablets yourself, mate? Just to test them out?
No, mate, no.
Yeah, I think it's not the best analogy I've ever heard. I think I know.
It was good. It was very good.
No, it was awful. I know where you're going with that, and that's the route towards rules which are fun, and you may not actually know what you're learning if you're learning anything at all, but maybe you are, maybe you're not. That certainly they're always going to be fun games, but then some of the most serious games we've had have been fun as well. I think that idea that some games should be serious and some shouldn't be serious, I think that's kind of, it goes nowhere. It's a discussion which I think is kind of pointless, because I think a better discussion is whether they are good games or bad games, or if you can make that distinction, whether they're enjoyable games or not. The seriousness and the plausibility, the learning, the information or not, is kind of all, it's just kind of noise around it. It's whether you've had a good time. But in that, there are games that you will always feel that, you're probably going to be more suited to you than others. I mean, it's a personal choice at the end of the day. But seriousness doesn't necessarily need to be something which is stamped all over the cover. It doesn't need to cover 400 years of history to be a good game. It could be a serious game if it's cover a week of time. I think, going back to the sort of 80s and the 90s, we felt that the serious war games were ones which were written by like a set of legal statutes, and they were serious by reference to their depth and intent and the lack of loopholes which were within them. And that was certainly something in the early days of TFL that I think you confronted quite a bit.
But that was, there was a whole cultural thing there. If you go back to the 70s and 80s, where the hobby was trying to present itself as a sensible hobby, not just grown men playing with toy soldiers. So the rules that were written in such a manner that anybody picking them up would go, blimey, this is serious. Problem is, it would also put them off ever trying the bloody hobby. There are different reasons for things happening and things being written in the way they're written. But I think ultimately the answer is beauty's in the eye of the beholder, isn't it? So is that game serious? Well, you choose.
But isn't there something there as well about roots into the hobby as well? I mean, I don't know, because I was, there were some good things produced in the 60s, and I like to think that I was one of them. But when people were gaming at that time, my impression is that the gaming was, as you said, Sidney, I thought, or Rich, whoever it was, you've got leather patches on your jacket, and you've got a briar pipe, and you've probably got 15 years military service in which you rose through the ranks to your point of incompetence, and then you became you retired and took on toy soldiers. That's not the way that people enter the hobby these days. People are entering the hobby as kids who are playing Games Workshop or picking up a water tanker or some other product. They're coming at the game from a totally different angle, and therefore what they want is totally different. And you can see that the games that we play today, and the games that we produce, and the game that other games designers produce, cater for that need really, really smartly, I think. and we're not selling to that same group of people that are playing war games in the 1960s and 70s. And I think so. The word "serious" about how serious apply. I mean, I have a friend who describes himself as a serious gamer. What he really means is that he's really into games and are kind of serious in that regard. Not serious as in as we were talking about with 220 paces a minute.
So it's a bit like being a serious alcoholic. You can still have fun, but you just really apply yourself to it with a will.
Yeah, and you can combine the worlds really easily.
Yeah. I'm comfortable with that. Well, is there anything more needs to be said?
That's it, Sid.
Time to open the bottle and get on with being serious.
But we should talk about what we did with the game this week, Rich, because that touches on this really importantly.
It was a fairly serious game, wasn't it? Interesting experience. What I wanted to do, and what I've been wanting to do for a long time, is to try and increase the feeling of command that somebody gets when playing Kriegspiel. And we've had the opportunity over the last 12 months, especially lockdown, kind of created a lot of strange side effects. And one of the biggest side effects was people starting to play Kriegspiel, because it's something we've been able to offer them and say, look, you're not getting a figure game, but let's try something different. So we've had lots of people coming to the world of Kriegspiel, and what tends to happen is you get your command and you're given your map and you make your decisions and you say, right, I want two battalions in that village, and I want my battery on that hill, and I want my Uhlans to go over there, and I want my scouts to go here, there, and everywhere. And what we're doing is we're ordering our units to specific places, but we are making the assumption that the localized commanders of those units then makes the correct tactical decision in terms of what tactical shape his force is going to be in. So we just accept the fact that we've got 2 battalions defending that village, and at some point they'll be putting out skirmishers, or at some point they'll be retaining a formed body that can and rotate through the companies that are skirmishing and doing all those things. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be interesting to try and get the players more involved by giving them the opportunity to make some more tactical decisions about what shape that their formations are in. So when you're attacking that ridge line where the enemy is there and shooting at you, at what point do your battalions start pushing out their skirmishers? How many skirmishers do they start pushing out? And really just giving people more conscious decisions so that they feel that they are commanding their units more than just telling them where to go. And it was a workshop session, and we used the War of 1866, which is the Austro-Prussian War. And the reason I chose that was that it's the first point in time where you're getting the breech loading rifle. And so we're seeing a period where you've got a significant increase in the rate of fire. And as a result of that, we're seeing that the tactics have to change from the serried ranks to the Napoleonic Wars. So, and we also chose to just play one side of it as a Kriegspiel. So the Austrians were pre-programmed. They have drill far more similar to the Napoleonic period. I'm speaking in shorthand here, but just bear with me on it, sorry. Whereas the Prussians have developed significantly newer and more flexible drill, which in a way presents a nod to things like the Boer War and even the First World War, whereby their main tactical unit is now the company, and the decisions are being made at company level in terms of how they go forward, and they're looking at pushing out skirmishers earlier. And there are some tactical challenges in that as they go forward, they're having to reinforce the skirmish line that's up ahead of them. And in order to win the firefight, potentially they're getting into a position where they've got to put the entire company in a huge swarm of skirmishers. And that, of course, presents command and control problems that whilst they're getting a lot of firepower going out, they are having issues in terms of, right, how do we now get this lot going forward again? Because we've reached the point in history where these troops are lying down, and all these things are adding to the inertia and the difficulty that the commanders have. So we decided that we would present this as a Kriegspiel, and that we would provide the players with a drill handbook, which was in an abbreviated form. So we had a brigade of Prussians, where we had a brigade commander, and we had 2 regimental commanders. And those regimental commanders were responsible for telling their battalions what their overall plan would be and what the main tactical shape they would take when they were attacking. Some of those decisions were made at a lower level. Some of those decisions were made at company level, where the decisions about how many troops that they put into the skirmish line was going to be down at battalion and company level. So that wasn't going to be down to the players, but their main tactical stance, whether they were pushing forward in close order or whether they were breaking out into the point where skirmishers were going to be going out, was going to be down to those regimental commanders. So that was how we did it. Nick, you were alongside me as a co-umpire.
We took 3 hours, 3 hours to cover 45 minutes of action. So we were doing 1 minute of real time, 1 minute of game time, or 1 minute of time in the battle was taking 4 minutes of our time. Okay, so if you're thinking about detailed, serious analysis downwards, well, you've got to say there's something going on there. Now, okay, we can't read too much into that, maybe because it was the first time we'd run that out and there were various issues surrounding that. But actually, this is a minutiaized sort of view through the microscope of one part of a really small battle. And the key thing that struck me from the feedback that we got from the players was the what they could see, their experience as a battlefield commander. There's no question that the game that we did with 3 regiments, 2 regiments actually aside, pretty much, could have been fought on a tabletop with figures. You could have played that. You could have chosen a set of rules and you could have played that out on a 6x4 table really easily. But what the players described as their experience of this particular game was around the fog of war. We know Kriegspiel gives you the fog of war, and by putting people in actually taking them, almost like putting them on a street view map and dropping them down onto the battlefield with their units, they're only able to see what's going on 1,000 paces either side of them, or if they're lucky they've got a clear view. But if they're in a town or if they're in an orchard, they're only seeing what's going on around them. And when we had the feedback from the players afterwards and discussed with them what happened, you can really understand how the Duke of Wellington was saying, you can't write the history of a battle, you may as well write the history of a ball, because there were 3 players, 2 of them didn't really have a clue what was going on. One of them was convinced that he'd been absolutely smashed, and the other 2 thought they'd won.
Yeah.
and just in this, and you wouldn't have got that with a tabletop action. If you'd done that with figures on a table, you would have all seen that the left was collapsing and the right was not collapsing. But we didn't get that. That didn't happen, and we could just see that the player experience was different and interesting. The feedback from players was good. Is it better than playing a figure game? Don't know. Has it got more potential for further exploration? Absolutely. So I think we'd definitely be doing more of it, Rich. Would you not say?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think what you have to recognise with these things is that one doesn't replace the other. One is not superior to the other. It just provides a different gaming experience. And if you're looking to experience the vagaries of command and make some judgments that are a higher level than sharp practice, but a lower level than is probably normal in most battle Napoleonic rules. It's an opportunity to do that and get involved in a game that's very, very different from those alternatives. So it's just another tool, if you like, in the armory of wargaming that we can use. It's certainly something that was interesting. And I think really, if we were talking about does that constitute a serious wargaming, well, I certainly think it does. I think it was it's one of those experiences that's more informative and illuminating than fun. I don't think there's any doubt about the fact that when you talk to players at the end of it, they go, "That was absolutely gobsmacking," but I feel like I've been run over by a dumper truck full of tarmac.
Well, they should try umpiring it. Would be my response to that. But there's some kind of fun in that, isn't there? It's about the whole process creates fun because it's a social activity. At the moment, people need to connect, and the way we ran that, which was done via Discord with a combination of text and voice channels as well, which was we were able to keep players updated using voice channels, and they would submit orders back to the umpires through either the voice channel or ideally through text. So they were sitting alone. Each player was sitting lonely in front of their computer screen. And the umpire would come in and out every few minutes to update them. But we definitely were doing more of it. It was a Kriegspiel on a different level. It taught us, in inverted commas, or highlighted some different things for us. It was educational rather than training.
Well, there we go, Sidney. I hope that answers your question.
Very clearly and very comprehensively. Thank you very much for that. Well, that probably brings us towards the end of the big issue, I think. So we should just get up from our sofa of contemplation and move over to the bookshelves in the library. And here we are in the library. So we're going to follow on from our discussion about so-called serious wargaming, because I really enjoyed the Taxspiel discussion, and I know, Rich, you've got a couple of books which informed your thoughts on the 1866 campaign over there.
Yeah, I have. I think it's interesting when we talk about what books would we link with serious wargaming, and there are books that we have in the library here, that which look at the study of how conflict is simulated and things like that. And these are books that are associated with, university courses and, particularly, masters and doctorate courses. And you've got books like this, which is Understanding War, which is a really well-known book, which is basically written by Trevor. I'm never sure how to pronounce his name, D-U-P-U-Y, Dupuy or Dupuy. Anyway, he served in Burma during the Second World War, but very interesting academic, and he basically attempted to take warfare and work it into a calculable theory. So you've got the QJM as an example, the quantified judgment model, where he looks at things like substituting force strength for the number of troops and looking at force multipliers and combat effectiveness values and things like that. Now, they are vaguely interesting books to read if you're a game designer, but I wouldn't honestly say that I take it out of the library very often, because, to be honest with you, books like that tend to disappear up their own arses, with people getting much, much too complicated about things that you don't need to be that complicated about. Far more important to me are books like these two, which we've got here from Helion, The Prussian Campaign of 1866, A Tactical Retrospect by Captain Theodore May, and the response to that, which is catchily called A Reply to the Prussian Campaign of 1866, A Tactical Retrospect, written by Colonel Bronsart von Schellendorf. And these books, fabulous little pamphlets, which really revolve around the big argument that they had in tactics at that time, which is what we've just been talking about, in terms of, as you allow your forces to go into this all-conquering firing line, you actually lose control of them. So you've got two different sides of that argument here, and this was an argument that went on and on and on, way past the Franco-Prussian War, where they had you'd have thought, a great opportunity to test out their theories and get it right. These were arguments that were still carrying on in 1914. So these books are not just pertinent to 1866, but to 1870, 71, and also, I think, to the Boer War, where we're seeing very much a similar effect of troops facing modern weaponry having to change their tactical stance. And then losing that cohesion and command and control. So it's books like these that I find far more informative than those big technical manuals which try and create theories of relative strengths based on combat multipliers, which are interesting, but honestly far more complicated than they need to be.
Well, that's a great counterpoint, those two books. And Nick, I think you've got another couple of books which you were going to mention as well on the same type of subject.
Well, I think when we spoke about serious, so it's about, if you're seriously into something, it influences what you do and how you do it. And it's just about understanding something in a bit more depth and a bit more detail, and going perhaps into trying to understand doctrine a bit more, or organization, or how tactics work. So I'm going to recommend two books on that, one for Napoleonic gamers, and one for gamers interested in Northwest Europe, Second World War. Starting with that one, if you want to understand more about the war in Northwest Europe, there's a fantastic book by John Buckley, British Armour in the Normandy Campaign, a really good analysis of how the British developed their operational technique of using armour throughout Normandy. It covers things like design and planning, but also more importantly in the experience of actual fighting, and how that influenced the way things worked and the way tanks were used to support infantry, etc. So if you want to increase the seriousness, in inverted commas, of your understanding of the way that nature of combat evolved, then that's a fantastic place to start. He's also got a book, by the way, called Monty's Men, which is around the British Army during that Second World War period as well. So if you want something more general about the British Army, that's really well worth to read as well. That's a paperback that I would really recommend picking up. The other book is by, I think we may have mentioned it before on the Oddcast, is by Rory Muir, The Experience and Tactics of Battle. I think the title of the book is Tactics and the Experience of Battle in the Age of Napoleon, by Rory Muir. It's a fantastic book that looks at how did these units go into action, how did they form up. If you like the piece on this in the back of Sharp Practice about how organizations form column, line, and why it works, and what happens to cohesion, etc., and how do units stand up against cavalry charges, it goes into that detail that if you want to go into it seriously, and again, this is where we connect serious to plausible. If you want your games to be plausible, they should look like what was happening on the Napoleonic battlefield. And this is a book that will give you the depth of understanding to go with that. So I would say the Buckley book is well worth getting your hands on. It's available on Amazon. You'll probably get it next day delivery.
No, it's not. I've just tried to buy it.
Oh, well, okay. It's not available. Look on ABE Books then. ABE Books.
Right, okay.
That's abebooks.co.uk is a really good source of secondhand books. And the great thing about abebooks.co.uk is that you can also, if you register on there, add in a book that you want, and when they find it, they will message you.
Oh, I have found it on Amazon, having seen the title. It's only £72.
Wow, okay, that's nothing to a man. I'm surprised at that, because I thought it was more generally available than that. But I know the Muir book is on there, and I know that you can pick that up as a paperback for about 20 quid. So, again, and if you go secondhand with that, then you probably have no problem with it at all. I think the $16.99 is the paperback on Amazon, and that's next day delivery. So if you don't have that book, it's worth getting a copy of it.
I picked up my copy of Rory Muir's book from you. In fact, you gave it to me for free a few years ago.
Yeah, you did.
What you were giving.
I did. Yeah,
that was a bit of a bargain.
So
my book. I think that must be no surprise, but I'm really interested in why armies are actually fighting in the first place, and where they're fighting, and why the campaigns which they're fighting in are taking place, and how those dynamics influence what happens on the battlefield, and in particular finance. I found that really interesting. So the book I'd say is one which I mentioned to Rich earlier today offline, is called The Business of War by David Parrott, subtitled Military Enterprise and Military Revolution in Early Modern Europe, because that period is one of constant change in state organisations, and armies are a weapon of state organisation, and how those weapons are financed is incredibly important in that period. You can't really understand why an army's fighting another army in a particular place unless you understand all of that, if you want to be serious about it. And good Lord, for decades and decades, I wasn't serious about it. Just lined up the troops on the table and somebody chose the train and off we went. Yeah. But for me, that sort of element of context is really important. I derive a lot of fun from that. But understanding that is kind of lifetime's work. I mean, nobody would really say that, and nobody who knows anything about anything says that they understand anything, because it's infinitely complex, really, when you go into the details. But David Parrott, who is a professor at Oxford in the history department and has written very big tomes on other early modern Europe things, knows a great deal about it. I wouldn't say that his thesis is completely one that we'd all agree with, but it's a brilliant thesis, and it's a beautifully written book as well. And it really talks about, well, why do armies campaign in the way that they do, and how were those armies formed, and why did they move, and which methods of warfare were effective, and why you couldn't have grand cavalier parties of people raiding where there were towns which needed to be taken by siege first. So the context, the physical geography of land dictates warfare, and the methods available to a state dictate warfare. And if the state doesn't have an army, ancient world, medieval world, then it has to recruit them from somewhere. And a military enterpriser in the 17th century was the place that you used to go. So your armies and your battles were dictated by forces which were far different than modern wars were subject to. And your tactics on the battlefield were also dictated by that. You know, which troops could you afford to use? Which troops could you not lose? You just could not use your small amount of guards who were your household troops as a king. You had to have them to defend your realm. And if, like Francis I at Pavia, you were using your gendarmerie and they were getting really smashed in constant charges, that had a massive impact on French nobility, which it struggled to recover from in later wars, like the French Wars of Religion. So all of those things are interconnected in a really interesting way. And that provides a really important context for when we deploy our French gendarmes on our battlefield. Are we just going to charge off with them? Well, yes, you can. Of course you can. You can charge into that pipe block. You might lose, but also you will threaten the integrity of your own realm. The houses of nobles will be decimated and destroyed as regards the elder sons who are going to inherit. So there are real consequences which it's fun to play around with and place on wargamers when they're playing games. So that is a really good book for looking at some of the detail behind what we might use to write rules or design scenarios. Don't need to do that. You can just line your troops up and have a lot of fun just doing other things. But I think that you get a lot of context from perhaps all of these different books that we've talked about, which informs the games we might want to develop.
And I'd say one more, because we referred to it earlier on. It's not a book as such, but we spoke about the Ministry of Defence Wargaming Handbook. That's available for free to read online as a PDF. So if you put in Wargaming Handbook MOD, you will find it almost straight away, and it's about 90 pages of A4. But if you're interested in exploring what's going on in the military, it's a few years old now. I guess it's 2017, I think, something like that. But it will allow you to bridge this discussion and make your own mind up as to how serious you will position your games against what the MOD defines as being serious wargaming.
Interesting story here. The United States Navy used to have a big wargaming centre in one of their training facilities, which had a floor laid out with a grid of black and white tiles, floor tiles.
Yeah, it's a naval base, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. And they used to use a set of war games rules in which they, were able to train their junior officers and maybe senior officers. Very beautiful setup with a gallery all the way around, so senior officers could look down and see what was happening. But the advice that they gave that their young officers is, if they wanted a game that didn't treat all destroyers like every other destroyer and all cruisers like every other cruiser, and they wanted more detail, they needed to go and have a look at civilian war games. And Fred Jane's rules were the ones that they recommended. And those Jane's book of fighting ships, they were all designed for wargamers, because that's what Fred Jane designed them for. But once again, I think we can discover that if you want serious games that have got serious historical content, that it's civilian wargamers who are actually leading the way, and also in terms of understanding what a war game can deliver. We know that a lot better than, I'm afraid, than the military do, because they haven't quite cottoned on.
I would say at the end of this discussion, I mean, that aside, the message which I think we always want to get across is that, you know, whatever the so-called seriousness, whatever the books we talked about, whatever we talk about in the podcast, people should just play war games. They should just play historical miniature war games and just have real fun with it.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
nobody's judging anyone. And it is all just discussion. It's not in any way suggesting that you need to do it one way, you need to read this book.
Oh, no.
It's just really about just having fun with your mates. I mean, that's the most important thing. And indeed, having fun solo and talking about it to yourself afterwards. If, you know, we've all done that. You know, but just playing war games and enjoying the hobby, I think that's... I don't want anyone to come away from this in any way thinking that, you know, we're subliminally trying to get serious wargaming into what we do. We just have fun.
No, absolutely right. You're absolutely right, Sid. You know what? And if you think, you know, if you think anybody you're playing with is too serious, then tell them, because actually it's not about being serious. It's about having fun. At the end of the day, let's be, you know, you're painting toy soldiers. Most of your hobby time is going to be spent painting toy soldiers, and you will be using them on the tabletop. You can play whatever games you want, but if it ain't fun, you ain't doing it right.
So that's probably the end of the bit at the end of the library, but we have one very special book that we did want to discuss, and I in particular had a few questions on, which is O Group. So our chum Dave Brown has put together a set of rules called O Group, which is about World War II actions. Rich, can you remind everyone what O Group is about, and then we can drill down into some of the details?
Yes, mate. It's a set of World War II war games rules for battalion level plus actions. So, you know, typically you would be commanding a battalion of infantry, and you can have troops attached to that. So, you know, squadron of tanks, or all the usual range of things that you would get. Artillery from brigade and division and corps, army group if you're lucky, anti-tank guns, mortars, artillery, the whole thing right the way across the board. So we're talking about a game which is going to allow you to refight, you know, battalion level plus actions, but also if you're having a big gaming day with, you know, friends at your club, you could every one of you command a battalion of troops. So, you know, we could be talking about brigade actions, and if you're completely crazy, divisional actions. So, yeah.
So Dave has put these together, and it's been a while since you've produced a battalion level, company level, or large scale game, you know, so IABSM, really company scale as opposed to battalion scale. So how have you found, you know, working with Dave and talking with Dave in changing the scale of those rules from what people will probably be very familiar with which is chain of command?
Well, that's right. It's a very different venture, and that's why they're published by Riser Press, our sister company, and not TooFatLardies, because it is a different thing. So, I mean, Dave, Riser Press and TooFatLardies are a very nice partnership, because we tend to focus, not exclusively, but we tend to focus more on the lower level games, whereas Riser Press with Dave and some of the other projects that we're looking at there tend to focus on the larger games. So it's neither's right, neither's wrong. They're just both mutually complementary. So Dave obviously is a very well-known game designer of many years standing, but Riser Press have published his Pickett's Charge and General Darmé, which are both fairly significantly higher level games. But it's certainly interesting, and I think that there's very different dynamics to be considered when you are looking at a game where you're you're focused all the way up to sort of brigade, because they're the people above you who are getting involved in terms of influencing what you can do, and you're controlling that battalion on the table. You tend to get more of an all arms battle. It's very definitely a battle rather than a skirmish, and I think that's really exciting. I think that what Dave has done, to be honest with you, is he's created a new innovative set of rules where command and control is at the heart of the game. Traditionally, when I've seen battalion level games or brigade level games played, they've tended to focus a lot more on the hardware and tended to focus a lot more on how troops move and how troops shoot. and then any command and control aspect has tended to be added on top of that, whereas Dave has changed that design process and look at putting command and control at the very core of what the rules are about. So if you like, he's done for battalion level gaming what I like to think Chain of Command has done for large skirmish size gaming, and that's created a game where you are focused on the things that the commander would be focused on for commanding that level of troops. So yeah, really exciting, really looking forward to them coming out. And Dave and I are just in the middle of a process of creating a number of chats and then videos on the back of those to highlight the way the rules work, so people get a real opportunity to see what the rules are all about before making their purchase.
So one of the things I liked about it was that you have already done a Lard in Action Ono group, I think, which is
we've done 3 cozy fireside chats, and we've done 2 videos so far, and the 3rd video has been shot. I just need to edit that, but life has just got in the way this week with just finishing off that Caesar's pint-sized campaign and also doing this now. But yeah, that's very definitely on the agenda for the next couple of days to get that video out. And we're trying to run through the way all the rules work, and we're focusing down and drilling in to look at very specific rule mechanisms, because I think the devil is in the detail with rule sets. And it's all very well for the company publishing them to go, this is a highly innovative new command and control mechanism, and you go, that's interesting, highly exciting, and all these new ideas, but you don't know what they are. And we're very keen to show people what they are. A, because it helps them to make a purchase decision, but B, we're also very proud of them. I think what Dave's done is really exciting, and I think people are really responding positively to that. We're certainly seeing that.
I think more importantly, the games look really exciting. The games look really good. The tables look fantastic, and if particularly in the smaller scales, I think this is going to be really impactful. And lots of new ranges in those sort of 12mm, 10mm World War II, and I think that's perfect for this. Absolutely, bang on.
Very good. So lots of more details to come on that, and those videos with Dave are available on Lard TV at the moment. And more to come. So I think that brings us to the end of the Oddcast. Thank you both very much. It's been a really interesting discussion. I've really enjoyed it. We will be back with the next Oddcast, no doubt, in a few more weeks. But until then, thank you to my guests, Richard, and to Nick. And we will leave you all with Roger Barraclough and his band playing us out on a very sunny February morning.
In tonight's show, Sidney Roundwood was joined by Nick Skinner and Richard Clark. Music by Roger Barraclough and his band.